An important aspect of being a community member at Cal involves the choices we make around alcohol. My name is Rodolfo Mendoza Denton. I'm a psychology professor here at UC Berkeley, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dri Kavusi, fourth-year undergraduate student and ASUC senator. Today we're going to talk about alcohol awareness, and joining me are three guests. David Presti, Department of Molecular and Cell Biology and Program in Cognitive Science at UC Berkeley. Karen Hughes, Project Director of PartySafe at Cal of the University Health Services Tang Center, and Andrew Goldblatt, Risk Manager in the Office of the Chancellor at UC Berkeley. To each of you, thank you and welcome. Let's get started.
Well, to start, David, I know you teach a lot of classes on drugs and the effect they have on the body. So could you briefly overview what the effects of alcohol on the body are?
Yes, I teach a class called Drugs in the Brain that is taken by about 600 students every year. And if there's one central theme in that class, it's that all of these things that we call drugs are poison. So that they're poison. They may also have medicinal effects, and that may depend on the amount or context of use. And they are best respected for their poisonous capacities. So with respect to alcohol, it has a sedative or slowing down effect on the nervous system and on the body. And it very rapidly crosses a threshold into something that becomes, that kind of renders us pretty non-functional. And then with a little bit more, it can actually cause death, which it occasionally does. So those are the short-term effects. The long-term effects are known to be toxic in many ways to many body organs, including the nervous system, including the liver. And those studies involve, many years of use. But there's reason to believe that even moderate use in large quantities could also precipitate some of those same kinds of bodily damage.
So it has a large impact, long-term and not just short-term. So down the road, long-term alcohol use can lead to...
Yes, I mean in terms of actual damaging effects on body parts, most of that involves long-term use. And in the short term, the problematic effects are going to be more on behavior, of which there are manifold things that I'm sure will come up in this discussion.
Yeah, and Karen, what kind of behaviors or outcomes actually do you think alcohol promotes?
All right, well, first let me just say that students love Professor Presti's class. Yeah, I wish I knew everything that you know about it, so thank you. And it's interesting to come after you because I think some of the other aspects of it that are pretty important about alcohol use in the college population are one, we don't want to overestimate how much or how often students use. That social norms misperception about how many students use is really exaggerated. So incoming students, actually almost 70% of our incoming students don't use alcohol. When you look at the full campus, all students, it gets up to about 70 to 80% are using. So it does mean that over the course of their time here, most of us, many of them are facing choices. And we're hoping that they realize that those choices and the drinking settings and the whole overall culture is a really important aspect of wellness, all the different dimensions, because there are consequences of use, positive and sometimes negative, that can be academic, social, emotional, physical, spiritual to use. And so much of it has to do with quantity consumed at any given time and the environment in which it's happening. Like, is it a safe environment or is it also a high-risk environment?
Karen, can I follow up with you really quickly? You say it's important not to overestimate the use.
Yeah.
Why is it important not to overestimate the use for the incoming undergraduate at Berkeley?
It's funny. Every year I ask a large group of students, like, if there's one piece of advice that you could have heard when you arrived here about drinking and parties, what do you wish someone had actually told you? And that's exactly what it was. I wish someone had told me that not everybody drinks. They're so surprised as people to find out that they're actually in the majority. They perceive that they are a teeny tiny minority. And the impact of that is that college students, not exclusively, but at a high rate, are very interested in fitting into what they think is the cultural norm. And so when they have inaccurate information about what the actual norm is, they're making choices to try to fit in, and what they're trying to fit into isn't actually real.
So it's pluralistic ignorance, in other words,
That is
the process whereby I think you want to drink and you think I want to drink, but in reality, neither of us wants to drink, but we both end up drinking.
And that misperception extends to misperception of negative consequences. In fact, we tend to really overestimate how much negative consequences happen. So for example, I think 2 out of 10 Cal undergraduates experience injury to self related to their drinking. So that means 8 out of 10 who drink don't experience injury. But when you ask students, hey, what percent of Cal students do you think hurt themselves as a result of their drinking, they will say like 70%. And you say, no, the actual answer is 20%. And they're like, what? And you say, what do you think that gap is about? And it's like, well, they just assume that college drinking means excessive drinking, and excessive drinking means stupid drinking, and you get injured. So the point of that is that because of the misperception, people fail to notice problems. They see a problem and they perceive it as normal to drinking when it's not. And then we don't, back to pluralistic ignorance, we don't step forward and be the first one to say, can I check in with you about that?
So this person is totally out of control or really becoming sick, and I perceive that as, well, that's just the way things are and that's just the way college is, when in fact it's not, and something to be quite alarmed about.
Yeah.
But Andrew, is there a safe way to drink alcohol, or safe amounts to drink alcohol?
Well, that really depends very much on the person, because people are different sizes, and the type of alcohol that they're drinking. There are a number of different factors that influence whether or not there's actually a safe limit of alcohol. The general rule, and again, this is very general, and nobody should take this as, as gospel, is that if you hold yourself to like 1 drink per hour, you're probably going to stay below the threshold where you do yourself immediate damage. And by 1 drink, we also mean some very specific things. We mean, for instance, 1 12-ounce beer, or 1 shot of hard alcohol that's just a tiny, tiny amount of hard alcohol. Or I think about maybe 2 or 3 ounces of wine. There's some very specific standards of what we mean by 1 drink within an hour. And so generally, if you stay within that, again, it's not necessarily safe, but it's much safer than if you binge drink. And I think that's the biggest problem that we face is, especially with students who are not experienced drinkers, very often they will take a shot and they will say, well, I don't feel anything. And so then they'll take another shot and they still don't feel anything. And so then they take another shot, and half an hour later, after 6 shots, they're in big trouble, because it's a cumulative effect and it hits fairly quickly once it does hit. And I think probably, David, you could speak more specifically to the biology of that. But in general, I think that's what we've seen with a lot of the students who've gotten in trouble is because they don't feel anything, they keep going.
What about, I know at parties a big thing is, pouring shots into Dixie cups or red Solo cups. What is that measurement in terms of the 12 ounces that you're talking about?
And again, it's totally imprecise, and it depends on who you're getting the drink from. There are some brews that could be pretty toxic, where people have put some very high proof alcohol into those little Dixie cups, and then there are others where there's less. I mean, unless you really know what's in that Dixie cup, you probably shouldn't drink from it.
I mean, we know that there are ways to drink safely, and most people who consume alcohol consume it in a safe way that doesn't get them into trouble. And I think that's a way of respecting the substance. And so to understand one's relationship with the alcohol and respectfully relate to it so that one doesn't overdo it.
Could I follow up really quickly on that? You just said, we know that there are ways to drink safely. How can the ones who don't know share in that information of knowing how to drink safely?
Yeah, well, that's a good test for the educational process, because I think we're not trying to say here, don't drink ever, even though that's a perfectly healthy behavior to adopt, and that's great if someone wants to adopt that. And most people choose not to. Most people choose to engage with alcohol to varying degrees and are able to do it safely and in the range where it's a social lubricant and so forth. So to have that part of the educational process, that there are ways to do this safely. And as you just said, 1 drink per hour is a good rule to live by, because that's a pretty safe level.
I can maybe pitch in. So PartySafe at Cal, that's sort of right up our alley. The point is, first of all, a key thing is to know the expectations and understand the community, your personal constraints, your family's expectations, your living center rules. Like, know what the rules are, because in addition to negative consequences being biological and personal, there can be sort of social and campus sanctions that actually, when students experience that early in their college life, a violation of any sort, their likelihood of experiencing attrition or dropping out goes up a lot. So you really want to avoid that. So knowing what the expectations are and holding yourself accountable. But secondly, just following some basic risk management practices. Personally, Andy mentioned pace your drinks to 1 per hour. Set a limit for yourself and count your drinks and know what a drink actually is. Make a plan and tell a friend. So one of my students, interns, she goes out with large groups of people, and before they go out, they meet and they buddy up. And they share with their buddy their plans for that night, how much they plan to drink, what they plan to drink, when they want to be home by, what their hookup intentions might be. And then they keep each other accountable and help each other stick to their plan.
So I know that we have a number of questions, but I have to ask this question. What happens if your buddies, you say, let's buddy up here, and your buddy's plan is to drink themselves under the table?
Well, I think that's a great example of monitoring and intervening in a timely and effective manner when something is unwell or potentially going off track. So it doesn't mean even while they're drinking, but when you hear a plan in creation that is not a safe plan, and learning, we have resources that you learn how to talk to somebody about what you just heard. So I heard you just say that you're thinking of really drinking a lot. It sounds a little, I feel concerned about what I heard. Can I ask you more about it? Can we have a conversation? Then and there is a small intervention, and it's not heroic, and it's basically theoretically what friends do. But so we don't want to wait to be an active bystander just when someone is passed out and we're deciding whether to call 911 or not. There's so many opportunities before anybody reaches that severity to have intervened in little ways to prevent little problems from becoming big ones.
So we've covered already a lot of ground here, including some of the biological and health effects of alcohol as a substance on the body. We mentioned Professor Presti's class. We talked about the important concept of pluralistic ignorance and the important concept of being able to measure and know how much you drink and the planfulness. We also talked about PartySafe at Cal, a resource which we will get to a little bit later. Let's move on to the role, we've already talked about this, to the role of attitudes.
Yeah, so I think in college, a lot of times students see, they've studied all week, they're gonna go let loose on the weekends and go to a party and drink alcohol. Why is that the norm? What makes that something that students think they need to do?
So my generation is probably responsible for that. There was a movie about 30 years ago called Animal House, starring John Belushi. If you haven't seen it, see it. Just don't follow what they do. But that movie, I think, really kind of reset the allure of the drinking life in college. It really did kind of create a whole impression of what it's like to go to college and to be social at college. And I think ever since then, we've seen an awful lot of living down to that particular stereotype, if you will. And I think that the impression of a lot of students is that that's what college is about. You You work hard and then you play hard, and you play really hard, which means going as far over the line as you can possibly go. And I think that, this is Berkeley. We're a little bit different. At Berkeley, I think we look at things a little bit more critically. And I think that, after 30 years, it probably is time for us to reconsider what it's like to be social when we're not working hard.
But does alcohol actually let off steam, like students believe? Does it really make you feel better after you've been studying so hard all week?
Well, I think that's a good question. Everybody needs to sort of check their expectancies, whether your alcohol expectancies are shaped by watching Animal House or they've been shaped by the $6 billion a year that the alcohol industry spends marketing to people from the age of 6 onwards to shape their perception of what college and drinking and what letting off steam looks like. I mean, what other industry is marketing ideas for letting off steam at that level to educate us? I mean, the industry is the de facto alcohol educator in our country. And we, people arrive here and then we have opportunity to try to provide some more information. But one of the things about, does it really? Sure, in some ways, but maybe not as much as people expect. And alcohol expectancies, like the power of the brain over what actually happens biologically, has been pretty well studied in placebo studies, where people who are given non-alcoholic beverages in nightclub-like settings act intoxicated. They physically are flushed and they act intoxicated. People who are given drinks with no alcohol, told that there's alcohol in them, they act intoxicated. So, of course, there's biology, but there's an element of how the brain works in this and how our expectancies are really important. So I think when people first come here, it's a good, important time to reflect on what your expectations are for yourself, where they came from, whether it's family history, otherwise, and get educated, take advantage of the tools and resources that are here to be smart and take steps that make sense.
Yeah, part of the, what's going on here is a cultural shift, which is always happening, I suppose, around wellness, and certainly it may be the case that alcohol does have short-term relaxing effects. That's why people do it. Even in those cases, if people drink beyond a certain amount and you talk with them more intimately the next day or something, they usually don't feel it had the same lasting benefit as they may have thought it had. And the idea of creating more of a culture where there are more options for letting off steam and taking care of oneself and feeling good and being able to recover from the hard work this is great. It's a great opportunity to be doing this.
So in other words, it's the case that people misperceive the benefits while they are engaged in drinking behavior, and the next day that closeness you may have felt to someone, that rapport with a best buddy, is no longer there.
Yes, yeah. And even the coolness. I mean, at least in my experience of talking with people who thought it might be cool to get wasted, later they don't have that same impression. But it's easy to forget that the next time around. So to create a culture where there's more awareness of those things continuously is the idea.
Also linked back to wellness and the work hard all week only to let off steam hard. I mean, that is not a sustainable model, and many students, it's so great when you meet someone and they're like, I figured that out for myself. I figured out that it really works better for me to do a little of that letting off steam, not necessarily drinking, other things, a little bit every day, as opposed to putting it all aside and then I'm going to make up for that on the weekend.
Right. And in the sleep module, we talk about the importance of sleep and talking about an unsustainable model. Play hard, work hard, and if you play too hard, then you wake up late and you have to work even harder, and that that cycle needs to be interrupted.
Yeah.
Just want to say also, the play hard, why do we assume that means partying and drinking?
Yeah.
Part of it is like, let's just check our language, and if we mean work hard, drink hard, let's say it. But if, double check what our language on perpetuating.
Exactly, the
and
equating of
overinflating.
playing with drinking.
Yeah. Well, I think a big problem too, at Cal, we're a research institution and students like to experiment, and what a better time to experiment than college. So What would you tell a student who said, you know, I'm not going to be a habitual drinker, but you know, if I get wasted, as you said, David, once in college, is that really that bad if I get wasted a few times? What do y'all have to think about that mindset?
So I would say it all depends on how badly wasted you get and what the circumstances are when you get wasted. I think that if you don't know your limits, and this is the first time that you're doing it, and your judgment might be impaired in all the ways that David talked about earlier, the physiological and biological changes that you start to experience. At that point, you may start making some very bad decisions, and those decisions could be very personally damaging to you, and they could even potentially be fatal. And I know we have a lot of examples of that here at Cal, unfortunately. I don't want to get into any, very personal, sad stories here, but think about this. Think about how all the people who have invested their hopes in you as a student are going to feel when they find out that everything that they invested in you, both, in terms of the life you've lived to this point and then the future that they wanted for you, is destroyed because of one night of binge drinking. And is it really worth all of that? Because the potential is there.
Yeah. So, Andy, there's an important point that you've made about the personal consequences, but your behavior also affects your community and your social circles.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to take the opportunity because risk increases as I drink more. So that's my personal risk. But the kind of one night out, the fact is on our campus, only about, 10 to 14% of our students binge drink pretty regularly. But we have a lot of students who don't drink very much very often, but they might have their one night. And there's a lot of them. So all of them having their one night at the same time takes a tremendous impact, not only on them personally, but on our community. For example, it was earlier this year, because there was a lot of them doing that on a certain night, there were no ambulances in the city of Berkeley for Berkeley residents who needed help. There were no beds available in our local hospital because they were all taken up by students from our campus who had been having their one night. So yeah, it is a big deal. Mm-hmm. In a number of ways. Does it mean it's not going to happen? No, we'd like for it to happen less, and we know that there's ways to reduce it. So, of course, people are going to experiment, and that's normal. But taking responsibility for that the same way that they would take some responsibility and not go out driving a car for the first time ever without having prepared themselves in some way and understanding what that entails. So there's a way in which we have to really help them embrace that and enjoy and take it slow and make choices to grow along the way.
And do you think mixing different drugs, I remember beer before liquor and liquor before beer, those sorts of outages, do you think that really makes a difference in the amount of drunkenness, David?
As far as I know, it's pretty much proportional to the amount of alcohol you intake. So if you mix in hard liquor with beer, distilled liquors with beer, you're going to be consuming a lot more alcohol. And certainly there are synergistic, when you talk about mixing alcohol with other kinds of drugs, there are synergistic intoxicating effects. So alcohol plus marijuana, for most people, ends up being much more intoxicating than you would expect for just the sum of those two. Yeah. And in general, that's the case of mixing alcohol with other intoxicants. Alcohol plus certain pharmaceutical pills, like alcohol plus a Valium or a Klonopin or something like that, can produce a massively increased intoxicating effect and amnesia and blackouts, loss of memory, beyond what would be expected from the effects of the individual drugs.
Which surely has an effect on physiology long term. We've covered, again, a lot of ground here, but I think one of the things that's salient to me is that some of these attitudes that we perceive as normal can really be traced back to cultural events, movies and the like, that then become an unspoken norm that people find very hard to break, and yet to their own very detriment. It has personal effects, and I'd like to keep going and talk a little bit about the effects on the broader community and the environmental facilitators of alcohol use. But let's hold off on that conversation just a little bit to talk about the medical care.
Yeah, so let's say you go out drinking and a friend of yours is totally beyond help. You know, can't stand on their own, maybe vomiting. When do you know to seek medical advice? When do you call 911?
I think even more importantly, before they are clearly in need of 911, when do you intervene?
Cut them off, yeah.
We have the PartySafe interns this year. A couple of them are licensed bartenders, and so they are bringing information to bear about party safety and monitoring and intervening regarding intoxication. And we kind of are outlining 4 phases. Someone is either, okay, let them be. Someone is slurring, at the point of slurring. That's a point where you want to slow them down, and there's techniques for doing that. The third phase is they are at cut them off stage, no more, and they don't talk their way out of that. And the fourth stage is, get them home safe. And then actually the 6th stage is call for medical help. And for each of those, it's important to recognize the warning signs. So if you want to talk about the warning signs for any of those in particular, we can, but they are all also available. The information is available on the PartySafe website and is part of the education.
So this might be a great moment to talk about PartySafe. You've mentioned this a couple of times, as well as the PartySafe monitors, counselors?
PartySafe interns.
Thank you, PartySafe interns.
Student volunteers, yeah.
What is PartySafe? Okay. Where is it located? What's the website?
Okay, so PartySafe is a program of University Health Services Tang Center, and it's basically a campaign to minimize the harm related to drinking and parties around the campus area. And we work with all sorts of campus and community partners to create an environment that encourages healthy choices when people are and an environment that doesn't assume or overestimate that everybody is using irresponsibly. So we are housed at Tang, but the best way to connect with PartySafe is through the website. I'd say for starters, it's just partysafe.berkeley.edu. You can get to that website via the Alcohol on Campus website. And really, if you do alcohol at Berkeley, you'll get somewhere that will lead you to more information and resources. So there's educational resources, there's also facts about college drinking, about the standard drinks, etc. And we're very active and we're very excited about the culture change that is underway, and it's a good time.
If I could just interject one little thing about when to intercede. There's also, I think, a key point in any bystander's life when they see somebody in trouble, and the question is, do I get help or not? And very often, the bystander thinks, I need to keep this quiet. I do not want to get my friend into trouble. I might even get into trouble myself if I'm in bad shape. And so I have personally witnessed situations where a student clearly needed to go to the hospital. The student was in such bad shape that they needed medical attention, but another student would resist that. And that student became an obstacle to the crisis intervention people coming in and providing the assistance that the students who truly needed help could get. And so I think that if you do see this, it really is important to act sooner than later and to not worry about the consequences of what might happen tomorrow in terms of disciplinary action or anything like that. If someone is physically distressed from alcohol poisoning, they need help right away. And they need to be seen by medical professionals. So I just, that's my default is always to think in terms of get help sooner than later.
So in the event you do call 911, you say, your friend is really at that point where you don't know how to help them. What are the costs or legal ramifications?
You mentioned disciplinary issues, and I mean, that's scary stuff.
Yeah, a lot of times in my workshops, I ask, have you been in a position where you were debating whether to call 911? And typically, like 10 hands go up. And I say, keep your hand up if you actually made the call, and then tell us what actually happened. And here's what actually happens, which again is not necessarily often what people perceive or are they're afraid about. So what happens is the paramedics will come. Occasionally, sometimes the police come along with them, only to make sure that it's going to work and be safe for the paramedics. They come in, they ask to find the person, they deal with the person, and life safety is their top priority. And they leave, and that's usually can be the end of it. The party host might be contacted by our campus student conduct office later for a conversation about what happened, what could happen differently the next time. So it doesn't mean there's no consequences, but it's not a legal consequence. It's not necessarily a highly disciplinary. It's a learning opportunity and, kind of a social obligation.
Let me take this opportunity to add to, just since you bring it up, how does one become a responsible party host?
Well, you're on my favorite topic.
I'm glad to have you.
And I'll tell you why it's partly my favorite topic, because I'm excited to be with you all and sharing this information that is targeted towards our individual new students. But there are, 7,000 of them every year. Every weekend, though, in this town, there's probably about 50 maximum party hosts. If we can reach the party hosts, and the party hosts do the things and do the planning and have the security, including, we've just hopefully passing an ASUC bill that's calling for all party hosts of parties of more than 50 or more to restrict access to hard alcohol in common areas, to ensure that they have sober monitors and sober hosts and trained alcohol servers, and to keep the maximum capacity underneath what is legally required. So all of that creates a safer setting for whomever's at the party, whether they're using or they're not using. So we do have a party thrower checklist that we'd love to offer people, and we are happy to have you contact us and provide consultation.
Who else can be called other than 911? I've heard something about calling poison control, things like that.
Yeah.
Who else can students call?
You can call poison control, and one of the reasons that's can be appealing, and they're very knowledgeable. I mean, alcohol, as you mentioned, has poisonous capacity, and poison control is equipped to talk to students about what they're seeing and whether it warrants a call to 911 or not. Okay. And it's anonymous, and it's another option. It's an option, but as a campus, we did think about this pretty deeply at one point and just said, we need this message to also be pretty simple, which is if they've reached this point and they need help immediately, call 911.
And actually, again, to interject something real quickly, if you only have a cell phone and you want to get a hold of the University of California Police Department, the number to dial is 510-642-3333. If you just dial 911, you're probably going to get the CHP. So 510-642-3333.
And it's a good idea to have that number in
I have it programmed into my cell phone.
Mm-hmm. And what's the difference between calling that number and calling 911?
So there is no difference. It's just that that's the number you would reach UCPD emergency line via cell phone.
So Andy, let me ask you the same question, which is a student might be very aware that they're calling the police, so even more nervous about, getting arrested or getting into deep trouble by virtue of helping somebody out. What happens when you call the UC police?
So once again, I've been with the police when they've done these responses. And I think, first of all, the important thing to know about the University of California Police Department is that they are specifically trained to work with students of this age. So they're dealing with a radically different community than the communities that, say, a municipal police department would be dealing with. And they've been trained, and they understand a lot of the sensitivities, a lot of the concerns, the stage of life, all those other issues. They have background in these things, and they respond appropriately. They're not going to draw their guns. They're not going to, turn it into a confrontation. They're going to make sure that life safety is the number one thing that's seen to. Again, I've been with them when there have been bystanders who have stood between them and the student who needed help, and they never got, argumentative or rough. They get persuasive. They start to explain this stuff to you. And that's just the way our police force has been trained to operate.
Yeah, I don't know if your students have talked to you about this, but also, aside from medical, like if you're at a party and medical issues aside, if there's just trouble starting to brew or it's getting overcrowded, you can contact the police. And it's been great to talk to students who've actually done it, and the police came and they helped them disperse the party. I mean, there's nothing, and if there was altercations emerging, they help deal with it. I mean,
in other words, you don't have to wait for the super emergency to recruit the help of the community that's already there for you.
Yeah, think of police as public safety help that we pay for. So we need.
And it sounds so trite to say, and yet it's such an important fundamental change in our perception of law enforcement. Let me turn for 1 second to the role of education. We've all talked about educating ourselves, but I'm interested, David, from your experience, how are people changed by taking your course?
Well, my perception is that they come away from the education with a lot more appreciation of the poison medicine balance. So I mean, it's not that we usually think of alcohol as a medicine, but you can think of alcohol as having these beneficial things that are the reasons why people seek it out. And then beyond a certain point, the poison things dominate. And so to get appreciation of those boundaries between that balance between poison and medicine, and to have respect for that. So that's what I really emphasize is understanding and respect for the relationship that one has with whatever the substance is. And we're talking about alcohol here, but it could be anything. It could be caffeine, it could be marijuana, it can be other stuff that's out there.
Let's talk about risk management and training. People often hear the word risk manager. Andy, you are one such person.
I am.
What is a risk manager?
Good question. When I find out, I'll let you know. So basically, the whole idea of risk management is to prevent bad things from happening. And then when the bad thing does happen, to try to deal with it in the most effective, least harmful way possible. And so really what we tend to be about is making sure that the bad thing doesn't happen in the first place. And within our office, and I think a lot of risk management type of functions, the ethos is we don't say no, because risk is intrinsic to living. And there's a risk every time you get out of bed in the morning, and then there's a risk staying in bed in the morning. So we know that it's intrinsic to living, and so we don't say no, we say how. There's a certain way to go about the way you do things that will maximize the likelihood that at the end of the day you'll be able to smile about them. And so that's really what risk management is about, is sort of, again, managing the risk in a way that you can get through the experience, enjoy it, and then move on to the next one.
And so you mentioned your office. Is your office accessible to undergraduates, or should they turn to PartySafe at Cal for alcohol-related issues?
So I think if they're specifically interested in alcohol, there's certainly, I would say, PartySafe would be the place to go. We tend to be more of a coordinating and general office. We're happy to work with anyone who wants to ask a question of us. But certainly when it comes to alcohol, we're more likely to guide them to an office that has more specialization. So it would be PartySafe. There might be some psychological services in the Tang Center that might be useful. So we would work with you to figure out the best place to go, and we would guide you there.
He's had a great phrase in the past, like everybody's a risk manager. And I'll just say from students, I think one of the barriers to them being as good a risk managers for themselves as they could be is you have to kind of admit you don't know everything. And you have to think ahead and decide you're going to think it through further than you might want to. And you can't automatically trust everything out there. You have to take responsibility for thinking it through on your own and making choices and moving slowly. I mean, brand new students to this campus are so far out their comfort zone to start with. New place, new people. everything new. So you don't necessarily need to add new intoxicating levels of experience at the same time.
We have talked about risk management at the administrative level. What about risk managers at parties? Are there student groups on campus that hold more parties? Do they have built-in risk managers? And then how do they get trained? Are there services offered here?
I would say that where parties happen that students tend to go to tend to be at fraternity settings and co-ops and other off-campus house parties. And those are the party settings that I am most concerned about. And yes, they do all have some risk management policies and they have risk management personnel, but I don't think we are, as a campus and community, where we want to be in terms of the actual fulfillment and actualization of that.
So one of the important messages coming out of this is, I loved your phrase that we are all risk managers, and that's one of the themes coming out in this wellness seminar, that we are all responsible members of a broader community. Our individual behaviors impact ourselves, impact others. We've run out of time, but I would like to ask each of you, given our audience of incoming undergraduates, for that 15-second nugget of information that you would like students to take home with them around alcohol. Let me start with you, David.
Well, if contemporary brain science has shown us anything, it's that the behaviors that we repeat over and over again lock in the circuitry of the brain that lead to inclinations toward doing those behaviors for the rest of our lives, and to put together good habits of our relationship with alcohol and with our relationship with lots of other things, sleep, nutrition, all this stuff. This is one of the best ways one could possibly spend their time, while at Cal.
Andy?
So just to sort of follow up on a lot of what David's been saying, I think we should all endeavor to sort of maximize the medical or beneficial side and minimize the poison side. I think as long as we're just aware and respectful of what alcohol can do to us when we are not thinking about it and not responsible about it, we'll be okay.
Karen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess my number one thing would be I really invite them to get connected. So we have a PartySafe Cal listserv that we want everybody to join, so we can keep you updated about new resources, updates, opportunities for training and education. And it's not something that you'll automatically be assigned to, so you have to join by choice. And take care of yourself, build healthy habits, monitor your use, and when things are off track, know that we are here to help you get them back on track quickly and effectively. But we need you to find out about those things and connect with us.
And be an active participant in the community.
Yeah, join us as your own risk manager.
Karen Hughes, David Presti, Andrew Goldblatt, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next show.